Hi everyone. This is our final, lecture of the semester in which I show you several different tools in After Effects. So we're going to take a look at things like motion tracking, particle simulators, some other things as well. But what I want to get started with is something called Warp Stabilizer. So let's go ahead and get started with the lesson. Okay, let's get started with lesson 13. Go ahead and save as lesson 13. And this is going to be a series of shorter lessons, and the one we're going to start with is something called Warp Stabilizer. So let's import some footage from the lesson 13 assets. Let's start with flowers, but also grab major spoilers and multi-point tracking. We'll use those two for another lesson. So I'm going to import those items. I will create a composition based on flowers. And if we were to watch this footage, you might see that it's very shaky. So we might want to try to stabilize that a little bit. So there is a tool in After Effects that will stabilize footage somewhat. Now this is not going to solve significant problems. In fact, it's not going to do a whole lot with this one, but let's see what it can do. So just right click on the layer, go up and find Track and Stabilize, and then there is Warp Stabilizer. Okay, now it might take a minute to get through the analysis here. Notice up here in the effect control, it's starting to initialize, and now it's starting to work through the frames. And it's working through pretty quickly, so I'll go ahead and stay with you as it finishes up. So it's going to grab this initial analysis, and then it's going to go through and try to stabilize this footage. And once we get this thing stabilized, we'll take a peek at it, and I'll show you some different tools you can use to alter the effect or maybe make the effect work a little bit better. So it's still working a little bit here, finishing up the stabilizing. But once it's done, which it is now, we can go ahead and play it. And I'm not sure if you noticed it really well before, but there is a little bit more smoothness to the movement than there was before. But let's say we want to make it even more smooth. I'll go up here to my effect control panel, and there's smoothness, 50%. Let me crank that up to 75%. Every time you make a change, it doesn't have to go through the analysis again, but it does need to go through the stabilizing again. So it could take a little bit of time, depending on how fast your computer is, to get through each stabilizing. But once we get through this, we'll take a peek at it and see if it looks better. So a little bit better, but it's still got quite a bit of movement to it. Let's try some different things. Let's say we want this video to not move at all, to be completely stationary. I'm going to go to this result control underneath stabilization and change it to no motion. This is going to lock those flowers in place, which might sound good, but you're going to see some strange warping that takes place in the background because After Effects is trying so hard to keep those flowers in place that it has to make major changes to the background in order for that to happen. So here's the no motion, and the flowers look good, but if you look closely at the background, you see some strange movement every now and then that doesn't look natural. Now let me show you a few other things that we might want to play with in here. Maybe the different methods you're using to stabilize it could be improved if they're changed. There are different methods that are located right here. We're using right now something called subspace warp, but let's say maybe instead of that we want to use something called position, scale, and rotation. And as we do that, let's also do this where it says stabilize only. And I'm also going to change this thing called additional scale. I'm going to change it to 114%. Now, what I was doing here, this is just a method. We're going to try a different method to see if it looks better than the other one. This is just experimentation. This is where you're deciding what you want it to do. Now here I wanted to stabilize only, but you can also do it where it crops. Now, let's talk about that cropping. Whenever it tries to keep this image locked in place, it might need to be shifting the entire video. In that shifting process, occasionally you'll start seeing maybe the black edges where the video ends pop into your frame. So that's where you might have to have some additional scaling to keep that from happening. Basically, I'm zooming in on the image. Try not to zoom in too much, because once you start zooming in too much, you're going to start getting a pixelated image. The resolution will look bad. So maybe try not to go above 115% for this. Let's take a peek at that to see the results. And again, if you're just watching the flowers are pretty steady. There's still a little bit of odd movement every now and then in different parts of the frame, but if you're just focused on the flowers, that's a pretty workable shot if you had to use it. Okay, so that was Warp Stabilizer. Let's save that, and let's move on to the next tool. And we're going to do something called multi-point tracking. So I'm going to start a new composition. Control N, and I'm just going to call it multi-point, NTSC-DV. Let's make the duration 705. And I'm going to take my multi-point footage item and get it down on the timeline. Okay, so here's what we want. We've got this footage of this computer monitor. And if we were to play it, you can notice the camera is moving around, so it's kind of shaky. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to take some video and have it stay in this monitor. But the problem, of course, is that the monitor is always moving. So we can't just do a simple, draw a mask and drop it in, kind of like what we did before with the turtle video way back when. So we need to use something called multi-point tracking to follow the movement of this camera, so that whenever we add this image we want to place inside the screen, it will move with it. All right, so we've got our initial layer here on the timeline. Let's go ahead and get the layer that we want to place inside this monitor. So that's major spoilers. Let's bring that down to the top of the stack. Now that's going to bury everything. So we need to temporarily turn off the video for this layer so we can see what we're working with. Okay, so once you have this at the top of your stack, let's go in to our multi-point tracking layer, right click, go up and find Track and Stabilize, and the one we want to go find is Track Motion. Okay, whenever you click on that, it should open up some different things. First, it opens up a layer window with a track point. Then it also opens up this thing called a tracker panel. Now there's different ways we can track. Notice right now we've just got one track point working, but we need to have 4 track points working to make this a more stable image or a more stable track. Just so you know, there are ways to do single point tracking, and you can fix something to a moving object, but that's tricky at times. So we're just going to focus on the multi-point today. So let's look over here at our tracker panel. Notice the motion source. It should be selected as multi-point tracking. If it's not, select that now, right here. Notice here where it says motion target, that's going to be the layer that is above your multi-point. So whatever you place on top of your motion source will become the motion target. That's what's going to go inside what we select. Okay, we need to change the track type. Click on that and go find something called Perspective Corner Pin. This is going to give us 4 track points, which is very convenient because we can put those 4 points in the 4 corners of this screen. Now when you drag these points, it's a little tricky at times. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. You want to grab it inside this box, but you don't want to grab this little target right here in the middle. There's a little kind of plus sign in the middle. If I grab it like this, you should see a window pop up, and there's that little X. It's easier to see here in the dark. And I'm going to place that little X right on the corner of that monitor. I'll keep dragging like this. Now, if you ever click on a track point, let me see if I can do it wrong here real quick so you can see. And it starts, sorry, that didn't do it wrong. Well, you might get it to where you're dragging it, and instead of moving the box, it simply wants to resize the box. If that happens to you, just undo, go back, grab it again, and you should be able to move that to the place you want it to go. Okay, so I have my track points set in the 4 corners. Once I get those 4 points set, I'm going to come down here where it says Analyze. And that little play button right here, that's the Analyze Forward button. I'm going to press that, and that will start analyzing this footage. And you should see those track points stay fixed on the corners of the monitor. If they start flying off, which I doubt they will, but if they do, then we're going to want to stop this track and start again and try to find a better point to grab onto. But this has really clean edges to it, which makes it easier for After Effects to stay fixed to those points. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. Once we get to the end of this, we're not done yet. Be sure before you close this window and go back to your composition, you'll see this button down here that says Apply. Okay, we're just finished. Don't exit anything until you click Apply. Otherwise, all that work you just did won't show up. Now, everything disappeared. Don't worry about that. That's just because we're at the end of the composition where there's no video showing. If I click back down here on the timeline and hit the home key, everything comes back up. Okay, now initially you might say, well, nothing happened because I don't see the thing in the screen. Well, that's just because we have the video turned off for major spoilers. If I turn that back on and hit play, now you'll see major spoilers staying inside of the monitor and moving with it as the camera moves, which looks nice, but you might notice on the edge of the screen, you do see a little bit of white line show up every now and then. And that's just because the edge of this is not quite matching the edge of our computer monitor. There is a way to clean that up. I'm going to save this real quick. The way we can clean that up is something called Bezier warp, and that allows us to basically adjust the shape of this interior image to match the curves of this outer image. So I'm going to go to major spoilers. That's the one we want to add this effect to. Going to right click, Effect, Distort, Bezier warp. Now the second you do that, you're going to say, I just screwed things up. Why did that go flying off? It's just a weird thing that whenever you add Bezier warp, it likes to be at the top of the stack. So grab corner pin, drag it below Bezier warp, and that should bring everything back to normal. Okay, once we get that added to our effect, we need to get 2 windows open in order to work with this tool. So I'm going to go up here to that multi-point layer. I'm sorry, I'm going to go to the layer for major spoilers. And I need to open this up as its own layer. So I'm going to left click, just normal click on it. You should see New Layer Viewer. That's going to open up its own window. I'm going to come back here and open up the composition panel because I want to see the composition while I'm working on this. Okay, in the layer window, bottom right corner where it says View, click on that, change it to Bezier warp. Okay, this is going to show you basically the edges of your video right here. And check out what happens as I start dragging these little targets on the edges. I'm going to grab this one in the middle, pull it out, and watch here in the screen. See, as I start warping, I'll do it really dramatically here. But I can do it more subtly to pull it out just to get rid of that little bit of the white. I'll kind of come down here and grab these. It seems like most of the problems are there on that left edge, but I might come up here on the top, clean up a little bit of that. Maybe just a little bit there, but that looks pretty clean now. And I can click on this to close. Actually, right click to close that panel. And let's go back and look at this with the Bezier warp. So now those white edges are gone. It fits the screen nicely. Everything looks cool. Okay, so that's it for multi-point tracking. Let's close this project and let's start a new composition. NTSC-DV, let's call this particles, and let's just make it 10 seconds long with a black background. Okay, so what I'm going to show you right here, let me save this as particles project. What I'm going to show you right now is something called CC Particle Systems 2. Now, that's a really long-winded tool, but what it is basically this thing called particle systems, where we can create different shapes that we can animate and do all kinds of interesting things to, and we're basically creating this from scratch. So what we need to do first to get the particles to show up is simply start with a solid layer. So let's Control Y, that's the shortcut for a solid. Let's call this solid layer particles, hit Make Comp Size, and hit OK. Okay, I'm going to right click now on particles, go to Effect, Simulation, and then you're going to see CC Particle Systems 2. Now you also see CC Particle World. We're going to play with that one later, but let's start with Particle Systems 2. Okay, I add it, nothing shows up, but once I start playing forward, that's where the action happens. So these are particles. And there are all kinds of things you can do to manipulate the shape of these the particles, the color, how they move. So let me kind of show you some of the controls we've got to work with. I'm going to come up here to my effect controls, and I'll start opening up a few of these menus, and we'll take a look at some different things here. Okay, let's start with physics. Animation. Okay, just click on some different animations to see some twirl effects. Twirly is a little different. Vortex, kind of cool. Fire, just different ways that these are going to move in unison. Explosive tends to be a pretty cool one though. And within physics, there's all kinds of other things, of course, you can change. The speed of it is controlled by velocity. One that you might want to play with a lot is gravity, which is kind of cool. Right now, positive numbers pull it down. Negative numbers make it go up. And if you just want it shooting kind of straight out at you, just change that gravity to 0. You can also mess around with resistance, which is just going to make it kind of like it's going through this sludge to get through it. So all kinds of kind of cool things right here just with physics that you can mess around with. But I think the most fun is down here with particle type, because we can change these simple lines to all kinds of different shapes. Stars, spheres, polygons, and we can change the size of these. Birth size just relates to how small or how large they are whenever they're first created. And of course, death size is the largest they're going to get. We can change the variation of those. I can change the color. That's the birth color, so that's the color it starts out at the beginning. That's what it's going to be whenever it ends. So lots of fun things here to play with. Up here back at the top, birth rate, that's just how many are going to be created at any given time. Longevity, how long do these things stay on screen? Lots of cool things to play with. You can get some interesting effects with particle systems. You can just imagine all the different things you can animate with this. You can have the gravity, the colors change, everything. Notice it's all got stopwatches next to it. So all of this can be animated and changed however you might want to. Now, just an easy way to remember the difference between CC Particle Systems 2 and the other one we're going to learn, CC Particle World. This is a 2D effect. So the 2 at the end just reminds you that it's a 2D effect. Once we get into Particle World, that's when we're working with 3D. Okay, let's go ahead and stop that. And we don't need to close this project. We'll just save it, and we'll start a new one inside of this. Let's double click, and let's go searching back to Lesson 1 assets. Now, for you, you're not going to have this, so I'm going to put this in the Moodle page. I'm going to go find Swimming Dog. So I will add Swimming Dog to your Moodle page so you have this one to work with. So I'm going to start a new composition. In fact, let's just start a new composition based on this footage. No, let's do it the other way, just so we have a certain, well, let's do it this way. I'm just going to drag it down here to the little make new composition one. Okay, so there's our dog footage from the very first day of class. Okay, the effect I want to show you right now is something called time warp. Time warp allows us to do slow motion, fast motion effects and to animate those effects. So let's do a little slow motion on this dog. So we'll begin by right-clicking on our dog, and let's go to our effect menu. We're going to go find the time menu inside of that, and then at the bottom of that we've got time warp. Now once you add time warp, look at all the different controls in here. This is a really complex effect. Now we're not going to dig into hardly any of this today. I'm going to show you just the most simple of things, but if you do want to come in here and play more, just look at all the different options you have to work with. But we're going to do just some simple slow down, speed up effects with time warp. So what I'm going to start with, I'll just go forward to 2 seconds. And at 2 seconds, I want to get the speed set to 100. And I'm going to start the clock. So basically, I want him to be going real time until he gets to 2. Okay, now I'm going to go forward to 4 seconds. Okay, at 4 seconds, I'm going to ramp his speed way down. I'm going to go down to 10%. So from 2 to 4, we're going from 100% speed to 10% speed. Let's go forward to 6. Let's change that to 100 again. And let's take a peek at that effect. Let's give it a second to render here. Now, whenever we do time warp, there's different things we can mess with. Like up here at the top, the method. Pixel motion is the one we normally want to work with. And I'm not going to stop the process here. But there are different methods you can use if you determine that that's going to be better for what you need. Check out the slow motion there. There's the 10%, and then it goes back up to 100%. So fast, slow for a moment, and then back up to normal speed. A little bit kind of like the Wes Anderson effect, right? Wherever he has things slow down and then speed back up. Let's say we want to smooth some of this out though. Okay, there are ways that we can do that. Let's go to our swimming dog layer. And I want to see my keyframe. So I'm going to press the U button to see my keyframes. And there we are at 2, 4, and 6. But I want to look at my keyframes a different way. There is a graph editor button right here. And I'm going to go back here and click on speed again to see my keyframes. And this shows us a graph of that movement. And right now it's pretty much a straight line down to 10 and then back up. But I'd kind of like to smooth that out. So I'm going to click on the word speed again to select all of those keyframes. And to smooth things out, we're going to use what we've used all semester, Easy Ease. Just press F9, and suddenly you start seeing a nice curve to all of those time changes, which is going to make that motion smoother. And you also see these Bezier handles that allow us to manipulate those curves if we want to. I'm going to go ahead and unselect all the layers or other keyframes, and then go back and click on the first keyframe. And I'm going to drag that Bezier handle down and pull it down like this. And then I'm going to go grab the middle one and drag it across. What I'm trying to do right here, I'm trying to ramp the speed down very quickly from 100 to 10. So that effect will happen faster. So you can use Bezier handles to manipulate how quickly or how smoothly things happen. So let's take a peek at that. Let's give it a second to render. This time you see it right whenever we get kind of to 2 seconds. Almost immediately he slows down and then it ramps back up. And we'll give it a chance to kind of go at full speed here. There it is, gets the ball, slows down, and then back he goes. I could show you a lot more kind of reverse motion or all that kind of stuff, fast motion, but this is an effect that you can spend a lot of time kind of digging into. So I'll give you a chance if you'd like to play with this more, but probably what you're going to use it most for are just these kind of simple speed changes that you want to animate over time. Okay, let's do another one. I need you to go locate other lessons. Now, I can't remember what I put it on underneath on the Moodle page. Hopefully it's all underneath the one for this lesson. But you should find some footage items called Clouds, Earth, and Starfield. So wherever those happen to be located, hopefully on that same folder for this lesson, go find Clouds, Earth, Starfield, and let's import those into our project. And I'm going to start a new composition, Control N. I'm going to call it Earth, NTSCDV. 10 seconds is cool. Make sure you have a black background. Okay. I'm going to show you a tool called CC Sphere. Now, this is something that basically turns any kind of flat object into a sphere, which can be really useful, especially if you have maps of the Earth or planets or moon or whatever. It's kind of cool how you can turn these flat maps into an actual globe. So I'm going to go ahead and get my Earth down to my timeline. And right now it's just a big flat JPEG map of the Earth. But whenever I add the CC Sphere effect, which is right-click, Effect, Perspective, CC Sphere, it's going to change that into a sphere, into a globe shape. Now we can manipulate several things with CC Sphere. Of course, the size is going to be determined by radius, not scale. So I can scale that thing, radius it down to 100 to make it smaller within frame. And just real quick, I'm going to throw some stars in the background. That's star field. And I'm going to scale this down to make those stars smaller. Okay, back to the Earth layer. Let's mess around a little bit with some of these controls. I think light's a pretty interesting control. Light intensity makes sense, right? And of course you can animate that, so you can have the light getting brighter and brighter and brighter over time if you want to animate that. You can add some color to the light if you like. Change the direction or height of the light. And again, those things can all be animated as well. But to make this a realistic Earth, we probably do want to have this thing rotating, right? So I'm going to open up the rotate property. And there we have the proper spinning of the Earth. So it might be kind of nice to animate this. So I'm going to make sure I'm at home. I'll start the clock at 0, 0. I'll go to the end of this project and maybe I'll just go maybe a 180 with this so the Earth isn't spinning too wildly. And there is our rotating Earth. If we want to add even more realism to all this, let's go find the clouds layer and let's bring that to the top of the stack. Okay, now this is just a map of clouds that we can turn into a sphere. So let's do a few things to this. First, of course, we need to change it into a sphere. So let's right-click, Effect. Now notice this time, since CC Sphere was the last effect that I used, it's right up here at the top, so I don't have to go digging around for it. So there's CC Sphere. I need to change the radius. Now, the radius I had for the Earth was 100, but I want the clouds hovering over the Earth, right? So I might want to have the radius for the clouds be just a little bit more, maybe 105 or something like that. I'm not seeing the Earth because all this dark area is blocking it. I need a blending mode that allows these black areas to become transparency. That's something called screen. Screen is something you're going to use a lot. So we'll go into our blending mode, give that a screen effect, and now all of a sudden we can see that Earth underneath the clouds. One last thing to complete the effect. We've got the Earth rotating, so it probably makes sense that the clouds are rotating with it. So I'll start the clock at 0, 0. Go to the end. Since I had the Earth going at 180, maybe I'll have the clouds going just a little bit faster than that, maybe 185 or so. And there is our spinning Earth with clouds moving above it. So that's a pretty cool effect. You can do different things with that. And again, we didn't play around too much with animating light, but that's a pretty fun thing to do with this tool. Okay, we have one last lesson to get through. I'm going to show you a tool called CC Particle World. This one allows you to bring particles into 3D space, unlike the Particle Systems 2, which was more of a 2D particle simulator. So to get started, let's get a footage item in called New York Medium, which hopefully is in the folder for this lesson. And we'll import that as a footage item. And we can start a new composition. I'm just going to call it New York City. Let's go 5 seconds on the duration. And let's get the New York image down to our composition. And what we're going to try to do is try to create this kind of fiery vortex that's taking place right here on the streets of New York. So in order to create these particles, we need to first start with our solid layer. So that's Control Y to get the solid layer created. That's the shortcut, or you can just go up and start a new layer up here. Make comp size, okay. And then Let's right-click on Particles, go to our Effect menu, find Simulation, and there is CC Particle World. Make sure it's Particle World, not Particle Systems 2. Okay, so you see the difference here between Particle World and Particle Systems. Particle World has this grid attached, which is going to allow us to line up the grid with the street, and then we can have this vortex hopefully happening right at street level. But we need to do a few things before this is going to happen. First, we've got to create a camera layer in order to kind of work in this 3D world. Remember the shortcut for camera. It's Control-Alt-Shift-C. So every single modifier key with C. When you go into your settings, let's make sure the type is 2-node. Let's go preset 35 millimeter. And make sure Enable Depth of Field is selected. We can hit OK. And let's go back into our particles layer because suddenly our grid has disappeared, and that's okay, it's still there, we just need to turn it back on. Here are our effect controls for the particles, and you'll see underneath grids and guides, grid is still turned on, but for some reason, whenever you add that camera layer, it wants to disappear. So all you need to do is unclick it and click it back on again, and we're good to go. Okay, so I've got this grid that I need to try to line up with the street. How we're going to do this is using something called a camera tool, which is different than a camera layer. It's a tool that allows us to change the way we look at things. The shortcut for this is the letter C. Now I'll put my cursor up here where it's located, and I'm cycling through the different camera tools right now. The one we want to start with is something called Orbit Camera Tool, and this allows us to come down here and just shift the positioning of this grid. Now whenever you do this though, I'll go ahead and do it real quick. I'm going to click and drag. As I click and drag, notice how it disappears. So it's kind of temporarily disappearing as we click that, which makes it a little bit frustrating. But I'm kind of trying to line it up with the general look of the street. And at some point, I probably need to drop this down some. So I'm going to click the C button or hit on the C key a couple more times until I get to something called Track Z Camera Tool. And I'm going to try to lower this down to more street level. That's not bad. Okay, so once we get it kind of lined up with the street, we need to get this producer down at street level. Just to kind of give you a peek at this producer. There's where the particles come from, that little red target. We want that producer to get down here to the street itself. So I'm going to open up producer right here. And I'm going to drag it down until it's lined up with the street, which is probably about, well, for me it's 0.19, looks pretty good. And that's kind of lined up with the street. Okay, at this point I'm done with the grid, so I can turn it off so I can just see the street itself. But let's start making some changes to these particles. So first thing we want to do, let's open up physics and take a peek inside of this. There's a really interesting control inside physics called floor. This determines what happens whenever these particles hit that grid. Now I know you don't see the grid anymore, but the grid still exists here. And it's almost going to be lined up with the street, hopefully, if we got everything lined up correctly. And once I open up floor, go find something called floor action. And I'm going to take a peek at something called ice. And check this out. When you change the floor action to ice, now things seem to run across the surface of the street because the grid's lined up with that. Now we can change that to different things. Bounce, they will be bouncing off of it. And glue, they kind of want to stick to everything. But the one we want to use for this, I think that works best, is ice. So these things kind of slide across the surface. And what we're trying to create here is just kind of this illusion of all this stuff caught into this fire vortex, all this kind of twirling, spinning stuff going around. Let's make some changes here just to get these things positioned a bit more. So I'm going to open up Producer. And let me just feed you some numbers so things don't get too chaotic for you. I'm looking at things like X radius. I'm just going to drag it just to show you right now. See how we can kind of start spreading things out with X, Y, and Z radiuses to get different looks. But let me give you some numbers just so we're kind of on the same page here. With X radius, I'm going to go 0.105. With Y radius, I'm going to go 0.085. And then with Z radius, I'm going to go 0.025. And that should give me a pretty good spread on the surface there. Okay, I'm going to change my particle type from line to motion polygon. And I'm just going to mess around here a little bit. I'm going to change I'll leave my birth color at yellow. If yours is still at yellow, leave it there. I'm going to change my death color to kind of a grayish color. Velocity. Check out your velocity. I'm looking under physics right now. I kind of want this to almost, since it's a vortex, to almost be, instead of pushing out, a little bit more of a sucking in motion. So I'm going to go with my velocity as a negative number. Minus 1.5 is the number I'm going to pop in, just to give it a little bit of that action. And as far as different things, I can also mess around with birth size, death size if I want to. I'll just feed you some numbers here. I'm going to go 0.18 on birth size. I'm going to go 0.16 on death size. Birth rate, I'm going to crank up a little bit, maybe 3.6, just to get more of those particles going, but I'm going to tone down the longevity to 0.5. I'm going to also add a screen to this layer, just so any kind of transparency stuff can show through. And also just to kind of lighten everything up a bit. Okay. So the next thing I want to do, I want to get a vortex going. Okay, this is where I guess we're going to create what we call the twister. And we're going to use these basic particles as a starting point, but then we're going to manipulate the positioning of those particles to get it to look more like a standing up twister. So let's just begin by duplicating those particles. And I'll rename this twister just so we keep it straight. So here we are in the twister layer now. Let's change this from an explosive animation. I'm underneath physics right now to get more of that kind of twister motion going. So this will be a twirl effect for this. You can kind of see it happening here on the surface, this twirling action. But we're going to start getting this thing elevated here in a second. I am going to change the screen to add, just so this one shows up differently. I'm going to go into my radius, which is under producer. And I'm going to flatten these things out because I want to have this thing kind of stood up. So as far as my radius on the X and the Z, I want this all the way down to 0. And you'll see kind of why we're going to do that here in a second. Okay, so for the Y radius, we're going to start widening that out. Notice what's happening. We're going to start lifting those things off the ground. I'm going to go to 0.65 is where that number is going to go. I'm also going to start raising my position on the Y a little bit. Maybe minus 0.8, something like that, just to kind of get them where they're going off screen a bit. Okay, velocity, let's get this back the other direction. So I'm going to go all the way 0.2 maybe. See how it starts to flatten as we get close to 0? It kind of starts to suck in on itself. That's what we're going for, almost this straight line. So about 0.2 is where I'm going to go with that. And this extra angle, okay, just check out what happens if I start cranking that thing up a little bit. So I'm going to give that a 2x, and maybe just a little bit more, 2x 50 degrees, just to alter the shape and look of that. Last thing, let's get the gravity tweaked a little bit. Let's start having that thing go upward. So that's going to be in the negative numbers. And I'm going to go something subtle, minus 0.05 for that. So we kind of have this stood up twister, this really kind of thin twister. But I'd like to get a little bit more wiggle going to this entire shape. And that's going to be another effect that we haven't got a chance to play with yet, called turbulent displace. To make this one happen, we actually have to add another camera to this, because the camera is going to be fixed on the motion of the twister, and we don't want the other camera to be altered by all the other things going on. So to make this one work, we first need to make a duplicate of our camera. So I'm going to duplicate camera. I'll go back to camera 1, and I'm also going to select twister, control click on that. And I want to join these two together, because I'm going to add this effect to both of those things. So I'm going to right click. Remember this, pre-compose. That's whenever we want to kind of combine existing layers into their own nested composition. Go ahead and change, you can change the name of this. I'll change it to twister. Everything else can be default. Okay, so now that we have this kind of new twister pre-comp created, now I can add that distortion, that turbulent displace. So I'll go to my distort menu, turbulent displace. And you see how that kind of starts throwing off that nice straight line into more of a curved line. And we can start animating some of this stuff to make it more interesting. I'm going to go to the animate evolution. I'll start the clock on that at home. I'll go to the end and maybe crank that up to 20. And now you can really start seeing that thing move around and kind of dance around on the street. And I could keep playing around with things like amount, size, all of those things. But we've already kind of created kind of an interesting effect just by doing that. And we can kind of keep playing with this if we wanted to, but that's just a little look at what you could do with 3D particles. Again, that's called the CC Particle World, which is going to allow you to kind of put these particles into a 3D space. And I know that was a little bit more tricky, so I'm going to give you an in-class project where you get a chance to practice with a much less complicated version of this, just to kind of get your feet wet on what this tool can do. Okay, that's it for this lesson. We'll talk to you later. Okay, that was our final in-class lesson for the semester, but there's still a lot of work left to do. So basically, going forward, the next thing you'll be doing is an in-class project. This will be kind of a two-part project, meaning you have 2 full class days to complete it. This will be worth 25 points, and the instructions are on the Moodle page. Following that, we will have our one and only exam, and I will have a study guide available for you on the Moodle page, and we'll talk more about this via email. And then lastly, for finals week, your final thing that you will submit is kind of that wild card After Effects project that we talked about. So again, I'll send you some more details on that assignment, but that will be our final project of the semester. The test is worth 100 points. The final project is worth 100 points. Please let me know if you have any questions about any of these assignments. Otherwise, I'll see you later. Take care.